Hi, this is Nate Sands from the University of Southern California.
Hi, I'm Aditya Naik from the University of Pennsylvania.
We will be presenting Spork, our tool for exploring code using query by example synthesis techniques. We wanted to create a tool that would help programmers find a range of patterns within their code. And these could include the patterns which are, say, found by linters or other static analyzers, such as bugs or common stylistic errors, but also patterns that would typically be out of the reach of these tools without significant customization. So as an example, a programmer might want to find places in her Java code where threads are spawned by indirect calls to the run method, or we might want to make sure that the auto keyword in C++ was being used consistently to prevent unnecessary type declarations. And we could leverage our ability to find such patterns to help us do things like refactoring outdated uses of an API or to enforce programming paradigms or best practices. A couple different studies have been done that indicate developers often do not use existing program analysis tools because they can be quite difficult to customize. In fact, the Microsoft study mentioned that 20% of developers whom they surveyed stopped using static analyzers because they couldn't find one to fit their needs. So we wanted to make a tool that would give developers the ability to write custom code queries that would suit whatever needs they had for any particular project. And we imagine this process as a sort of back and forth dialogue between the user and the tool, with the user providing examples of a pattern within their code and the tool responding by generating a query that matched those examples. And we challenged ourselves to keep the number of rounds of interaction limited and to make a tool that scaled to large code bases. So here's a brief overview of how the Spork system works. The first step is to take the user's code base and convert it into a relational database that stores all the facts about the program as a series of tables. And we use CodeQL's compiler to achieve this. Next, the user highlights examples of the code that embody a particular pattern of interest using an extension that we built into the VS Code IDE. These are sent to a synthesizer, which generates a query based on these examples, and this query is then evaluated on the entire code base, and the results are delivered back to the user. The user can then check these results as either being positive or negative, or provide additional examples in order to further refine the query.
I will now take you through a demo that shows Spark in action.
This is Spark. We will be looking at the example from the illustrative overview section in our paper, where we are looking for all expressions which are being cast from some floating point type to some integral type. For example, int cost over here. The variable cost is being cast from a double to an integer. This is problematic because it may result in some loss of precision. We do not know any other examples in this project apart from this. So let us annotate this example. We can do that by clicking on the Add Annotation button, clicking on the expression, and choosing the correct program element. We know that the cast is from a type of a double to a type of an int. In order to specify this in our annotation, we can add a column, click on the Annotate button, and click on the expression. We can then choose type double of cost. Additionally, we can add another column, click on the Annotate button, click on the expression again, choose type int of int cost, and this will give us our entire row for our first annotation. Spark allows us to add key constraints to our annotations. This means that certain columns can be selected as key columns by clicking on the key button. This tells Spark that the values in that specific column should be unique across all the rows. In this case, we are saying that any prediction with int cost in its first column and types other than double and int in the second and third columns respectively must not occur. This implicitly labels a lot of spurious predictions as negative examples. Now we are ready to analyze our annotations, which can be done by clicking the Analyze Annotations button. The predictions will be given to us in the form of a table with the same schema as that of the annotations. We can click on the expression, it will then be highlighted and we can examine it. This expression is a function call and is therefore incorrect. So we can click on the cross button to label it as a negative annotation. Furthermore, we know that any prediction with this value in its first column, regardless of the values in the second and third columns, will always be negative, since this can never be a cast from a double or any floating point type to an int or any integral. Spark therefore allows us to generalize negative feedback by marking the asterisk buttons in the respective columns. This now tells Spark that any row with this value in the first column, regardless of the values in the second or third column, should always be considered as a negative prediction. We can now click on the Analyze Annotations button again for further rounds of analysis. Now, after a few rounds of analysis, we have arrived at predictions which are both correct. Both of these expressions are casts from type double to type size underscore t, size underscore t being the type def of unsigned long. This now concludes our search for expressions converted from some floating point type to some integral type. We can click on the Save Results button to save both the predictions as well as any positive annotations, in this case the first row over here. Spark also allows us to see the latest synthesized query which results in these predictions. We can do so by clicking on the Show Latest Query button, which opens a data log query over here. This data log query selects all the cast expressions x0 which have been cast from expressions x4, where the type of x4, x1, is of a floating type, and the type of x0, which is x2, is of an integral type.
Let's now take a look at the evaluation of Spark. Here we consider two kinds of evaluations. The algorithmic evaluation, where we measure the suitability of the underlying algorithms for the use case of Spark, and the user study, where we find out if users find Spark helpful. For the benchmarks, we collected 17 patterns over 5 code bases. The patterns were collected from existing frameworks like SEML and SEMGREP, and warnings from compilers like GCC. All the patterns were written in Datalog. The code bases were collected from GitHub and included popular repositories like the Linux core utils and MySQL database connectors. For the algorithmic evaluation, we measured the time taken, which was the cumulative synthesis time across all rounds of interaction for each benchmark. We see that 14 out of the 17 benchmarks were solved by Spark within 10 seconds, while the rest were solved within a minute. We also see that Spark needs less than 5 rounds of interaction for 12 out of the 17 benchmarks, whereas the rest required less than 7 rounds of interaction. And we also see that 11 out of the 17 benchmarks required less than 5 labels, while the rest required less than 7. We also measure the impact of the uniqueness and generalized feedback. The runs of Spark with uniqueness and generalized feedback activated are represented by the blue columns in the graph, and the runs of Spark without those are represented by the red columns. We can see that in almost all cases, the uniqueness constraints and generalized feedback have a positive impact on the performance of Spark. For the user study, we tasked 5 graduate students majoring in computer science to find 2 patterns over different code bases using Spark, SEML, and SEMGREP. These students had some experience with program analysis. We found that more participants were able to find the patterns using Spark rather than SEML or SEMGREP, and on average they rated Spark easier to use than the other 2 tools. They also said that the uniqueness constraints and generalized negative feedback were useful features in Spark. To conclude, Spark offers interactivity since it allows developers to explore code and provide feedback, and effectively uses this feedback to learn patterns in a reasonable time with a few labeled examples. Spark offers flexibility since it lets the developers specify diverse code patterns, as we have seen earlier, which can be very specific to projects. And Spark offers convenience since it is implemented as an interactive IDE extension, and it avoids the need to learn query languages, have expertise in program analysis domains, and manually write queries and checkers. This concludes our talk on Spark. Thank you for watching.